Hello everyone, my name is Magnolia and welcome back to my channel. If you're here for the first time, I build trees. Then I make tutorials for free and Lightmatica schematics and graphs you can download and is this a plug for my Patreon? Yes it is, link in the description. Anyway, today I will be teaching you how to build your own custom trees by walking you through my process. This is the formula that works for me, but you should mix and match the pieces however works for you. How do you decide which tree to build? I will usually go for something that already exists in the game and spruce it up. Get it? Spruce it up? No? Okay. That's actually why I started making trees, is because I couldn't find anything I liked for custom birch trees, and I wanted to make the area around my house a little more interesting. But I've also made trees that don't exist in the game. These cypress trees were actually inspired by a comment on one of my videos that I found to be an interesting challenge. What it all comes down to is inspiration. If I'm not inspired to make a tree, it's gonna look a little worse for the wearer than a tree I actually wanted to build. The most important part of this process, reference pictures. Some people will tell you that real art only happens when you don't use references. That is a lie. Art has been made with references for the majority of history. Some of the most famous pieces of art in the world were made with references. And now, we live at the time in history with the most references available to us ever. So we are going to use them. If I've decided on making, say, birch trees, I'll look up birch trees. I personally like to do a little bit of research before I pick my tree officially, so I look for a few different things to determine which one I will pick. The things I look for are the type of tree, the shape of the tree, the size, the function, and the color palette. Trees will often be quite diverse in shape and size, even under the same name, so I'll look at the different kinds and figure out what I like best. For instance, I specifically built Italian cypress trees when I was going for my cypress trees, not Monterey or even Arizona cypress trees. Shout out to Arizona, the best state in the US. I also look for shapes. In my mind's eye, I'll look over the shape of the trunk, the way the leaves grow, and the general shape of the actual full tree. This is because Minecraft cannot perfectly imitate the details of the leaves and the branches. It's impossible to make a perfect 1:1 scale and shape of a tree in Minecraft. So, by focusing on the shape of the tree, we're able to replicate the feeling of the tree, those things we subconsciously notice when we're on a nature hike. How big a tree is also important in carrying that feeling into the game. Obviously, Minecraft proportions are not quite realistic. So, understanding the function of your tree can help determine size. For example, in this build, I've made these houses tiny but livable. This whole complex is tiny but livable. I've purposely made it that way. The function of this build was to feel claustrophobic with a false sense of openness. Yeah, I know, contradiction. When putting in trees, I need to be mindful of that function. If a tree is too big, we lose scale on the houses and they look completely unlivable. But make the trees too small and they start to look like bushes. For this build, I had to cater my trees to their function, support that open sky feeling without worsening the claustrophobia. So I landed on these tiny potted oak trees, taller than a person but not as tall as the houses. Perfect mix. However, if I built those same oak trees here, I would lose the vibes of the picnic scene I've set up. A picnic tree needs to be tall enough to not intrude on the picnic, but needs to be short and leafy enough that it provides shade. So I went with this big oak tree. It's the same kind of tree as the tiny build, but it has a different function and size. The last thing I look for in reference pictures is the possible color palette. This step transitions us back into the game, as we need to be able to build a lifelike tree with the colors available to use in the game. That leads us straight into the next step, getting together a block palette. This is where shape and size especially come into play. For my birch trees, I needed to make something big and a little bit triangular in shape, with clunky little cubes. We'll get to those little cubes later. For now, let's focus on color. In order to pick our block palette, we need to look at the colors of the trunk and the leaves. So in art, there are 3 sliding scales that color is determined by: hue, saturation, and brightness. The hue determines the color. The saturation determines how intense that color is, and brightness, well, determines brightness. As we pick out colors, we can see where they fall on each of these sliders. Brightness is the one that I ignore the most when making trees, since I feel like it doesn't make that big of a difference. Hue is obviously the most important as it determines the color you're using. Saturation also plays a huge role. For example, this diorite block that I've used for my birch trees is not pure white. There are actually 6 different colors, and while 2 or 3 of those have 0 saturation and therefore the hue is just white, 3 have very slight saturation. If we intensify that saturation all the way, it starts to look, well, bad. So it's important to keep in mind how intense and saturated your colors are. Most examples aren't going to be as extreme as the diorite example, but saturation does make a difference. Going back to the birch trees, I ended up using mostly acacia leaves because that matched the color and the saturation of real-life birch trees better. And then I used the in-game birch leaves to make shadowed leaves. Alright, back to our clunky little cubes. So in addition to color theory and that nonsense, we also have to look at shape and how we can use these clunky little cubes to imitate the wildness of nature. Now, don't get me wrong. I love this game, I love the clunky little cubes, but they are just cubes. Luckily, we have fences, fence gates, and walls to work with. These make it possible to have a tapering trunk and thin, unconnected branches. Think outside the box on this one. What walls match the color of the tree? Don't worry too much about the close-up texture, because at a certain distance, it all blends together. Worry about the shape. Branches, for example, taper. So do tree trunks. Use trapdoors and stairs and buttons to create a vertical curve gradient, or weird knobbly bits on the trunk itself. One last detail to consider when choosing the block palette is texturing. Think outside the box. Look at how texturing took my bland birch log trunk and made it something more modeled and realistic. I used diorite here to break up that birch log texture, and from a distance and even up close, it makes it look a lot more realistic. Now, we put it all together. This is straight up trial and error. Use those shapes we looked at to build the trunk and the branches first, and then start adding leaves. Consider certain things along the way. How does it grow? Is it pulled down by gravity or does it grow towards the sun? When you add leaves, how densely packed do you want them? Do you want to be able to see through them? Or is it more of a shade tree? Do you want to have 2 colors of leaves in order to make shadows? If so, where does the sun hit the leaves? Just play around with the build until it feels right. Go back to your reference pictures and try to look at them abstractly. Figure out what the tree is missing and find a way to add it. The bulk of your time will likely be spent on this process. So, we finished building. Or have we? Walk around. Fly around. Look at that tree from every possible angle and then some. Notice where the shape gets weird, where the leaves are wonky, where the branches poke out or where they're covered. Then make adjustments accordingly. Use those reference pictures. And finally, my most important piece of advice. Think outside the box. If you never think outside the box, you limit your creative potential. Think abstractly. If you're so caught up in what a block is called, you'll never use it to its full potential. If you can remove yourself from what you think you can do and just go for what you want to do, that is where your creativity will shine. And that is the only tree building tutorial you will ever need. If you liked the video, please hit that like button. If you have a comment, I'd love to hear it. And if you like my content, please consider subscribing. My sub goal is 150 by the end of June. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!